Hi, my name is Burl Sheldon. I'm going to be giving you a presentation on how insulin resistance, the persistently excessive insulin hormone in the body, can hack our eating behavior. And I'll get right with it here with a screen share. Okay. Well, I'm going to discuss some main characters. They deal with our hormones right off the bat. We'll get to insulin resistance. That will take a number of slides to get through. We'll be bootstrapping basic metabolic health and talking about foods that are disease fighters and those that are disease makers. Then cover this amazing balancing act between two hormone systems. Well, one hormone system that is about eating and energy balance, and the two hormones being ghrelin and leptin, and what happens when the brain essentially becomes blind to the leptin signal. Then the signs and symptoms of hacked eating behavior, craving and addictions, neurotransmitters, and then simply the conditioned behavior that is around and that we build our eating behavior around that sometimes is very unproductive to metabolic health. And for folks who might be concerned about addictive eating behavior, I offer the Yale Food Addiction Scale and then some lifestyle resources at the end of the program. Okay, insulin is what I consider to be kind of the queen of energy balancing hormones. Ghrelin is a short-term eat now hormone, and leptin is about long-term food intake balance. Those three hormones are complicated three-dimensional um, molecules made primarily of amino acids. They are proteins. And then dopamine and serotonin are smaller signaling molecules, and dopamine is frequently known to be addicted to be about addiction or craving. And serotonin we frequently refer to as the happiness molecule, and it actually has numerous tasks in the body. And Neil Bernard is a scientist who is a teacher in my study program to be a plant-based health and wellness coach. And Neil Bernard is a endocrinologist, one who studies the problems in patients that deal with hormone imbalances. That a hormone is like a letter in the mail. I would say a neurotransmitter is just simply a short letter or a signal instead of a full letter. Well, I mentioned, we're talking about 3D proteins. And in the case of the queen, insulin, um, insulin is made by the pancreas, but it is released into the liver directly through the pancreatic duct. And so it goes to the liver immediately but yet it is used in every cell of the body that's energetically active. And it is basically the energy ushers um, uh, blood glucose into the cells, but it also is directly involved in elevating new fat. So whenever there is serum glucose, we should always have insulin in the bloodstream. And wherever there is not insulin in the bloodstream, when there is glucose present, there's a very serious problem. So among the challenges that are so obvious in our new modern society of, if you will, hacked eating behavior, is that insulin is elevated. There's a lot of overweight bodies because of insulin being elevated, blood sugar being elevated, chronic stress. There's lots of other contributors to that. But you cannot lose weight if insulin is elevated. So let's look at a nice little basic schematic from the good folks at iStock about how this insulin glucose thing works with a typical cell. Insulin comes in, it's got glucose nearby, and it hooks up to the cell surface through an insulin receptor, and that enables glucose to enter the cell where it will be converted to energy. If something bollockses up that process, if there's something that interferes with that process, if the cell resists the business of insulin in getting food energy into the cell, that is the core problem in metabolic disease. So I'm going to go through 5 stages here, five factors that are interconnected. They are lifestyle factors, but 3 of them deal strictly with nutrition. And there's a I think an important idea that when we lower blood sugar, we will lower insulin. That is correct. But blood sugar and carbohydrate energy, white flour and sugar, are not the only causes of that problem. Insulin resistance is a factor in disease that is caused by all 3 of the macronutrients, protein, fat, and carbohydrate. So we have persistently elevated blood sugar, which requires insulin. And the best way to get that is with starch, that is white flour, and sugar. Then, of course, white flour and sugar can be converted to triglycerides when they're converted to fat in the body. And we can also make fat from eating fatty food. So these elevated triglycerides jam up and essentially disable the insulin receptors on the surfaces of cells. And then we have a problem that I think most people don't appreciate, that animal fat is elevated in the branched chain amino acids. They are valine, isoleucine, and leucine. And branched chain amino acids are associated with poor glycemic control, poor blood sugar control. And they also are associated with what, from the research that I've read, is basically intractable insulin resistance. For example, remote muscle, a thigh muscle that has insulin resistance and embedded fat, marbled fat, like a New York steak, say, for example, that is the most intractable tissue to try to reverse. So branched chain amino acids in the bloodstream are involved in those challenges. Okay, so when the diet lacks fiber, it also lacks plant-based antioxidants. And there's no question that diets that are lacking in fiber and plant nutrients are implicated in insulin resistance. Chronic stress, metabolic inflammation, which is also referred to as chronic systemic inflammation, excessive free radicals, that's oxidative stress. All that stuff is involved in this problem of insulin resistance. So insulin resistance means too much sugar and insulin are in the bloodstream. Inflammation is involved. And that inflammation affects the hypothalamus, the brain's hormone regulating center. We have less glucose moving into cells. The pancreas must make more insulin. And in a person who is type 2 diabetic, that had better get straightened out because the pancreas could quit working properly, in which case a type 2 diabetic person could be type 1. In other words, their pancreas can no longer make insulin properly. So we're also making new fat from glucose, all the problems that are associated with that. The leading cause of death of a person who is type 2 diabetic is heart disease. And then these other disease factors are associated with uncontrolled blood sugar. Talking a little bit about metabolic health, I will urge people to pay attention to a lipid panel, which is probably have a fasting glucose lab from a doctor. Pre-diabetic is 5.7 to 6.4. You don't want to go into that range. People who are older can have higher A1C. Hemoglobin A1C is the measurement I'm speaking of. And then we generally want our cholesterol to be under 200, preferably, and what is referred to by the CDC as optimal, is 150 or thereabouts, because it turns out a quarter of the people between age 40 and 60 in the longest running heart study, the Framingham Heart Study, a quarter of those who had a heart attack between the ages of 40 and 60 had cholesterol at or below 200 milligrams per deciliter. So I'm asking, does that sound protective to you? That does not sound protective to me. So you want your cholesterol to be pretty low. And among the things that we in our lipid panel, the bad guys are the triglycerides. And so Dr. Robert Lustig, who is a professor of endocrinology at the University of California, San Francisco, has a wonderful set of educational programs on cholesterol. He comments that when we look at the ratio of triglycerides to HDL, that's a division, triglycerides divided by HDL. If your number is 1.4 or below, you will live forever. That's a quote. And then above 2.0, look out. As we get above 2.0, 2.5 would be a problem. So we can monitor that, and that's kind of a poor man's way of evaluating metabolic health, looking at that triglyceride to HDL ratio. Today, I spoke with somebody who has very high cholesterol, yet low blood pressure, low triglycerides, and I would say that's perhaps something that's familial, something that's genetic. We can lower our bad cholesterol and our triglycerides generally by restricting sugar, by lowering our fat intake, skipping the processed foods, and dumping the white flour, and of course, increasing whole plant colorful foods. And so here again, the good people at iStock in another slide of Metabolic Health 101. On the left are all the good reasons why we need to eat more whole plant foods. High in fiber and antioxidants, provide you with a few, very few exceptions, all of the vitamins and minerals that you might need, assuming that you're being careful and eating whole plant foods. Absorbs cholesterol. You can eat cholesterol, bacon and eggs. And if you were to mix it up with a nice stir fry, you'd be absorbing some of that cholesterol before it was integrated into your bloodstream. It absorbs estrogen that your liver will dump into the small intestine. And so we reduce cancer risk because of that. It's very low in saturated fat, low blood sugar, low free radicals, low glycation. That's the stuff that makes wrinkles on my face. Non-inflammatory, colorful. And basically, that gives us stronger metabolism. It gives us stronger disease fighting. Why is there so much disease in America? It's kind of encompassed on this slide. We get normal weight. And by the way, this whole plant foods diet approach, with or without meat, and I should point out, I happen to be a person who enjoys eating some meat, but it's a balanced relationship. That is that left side, excuse me, the left side is high carbohydrate eating. Plants are naturally high in carbohydrate. This idea that low carb is a healthy diet, look out, because the whole plant foods are high carbohydrate and what we need to be eating more of. It's the refined carbohydrate that we need to get rid of, which is on the right. Very low fiber, high calorie, high saturated fat, high in those animal protein branch chain amino acids, high cholesterol, blood sugar, free radicals, on you go. And that produces weakening conditions of metabolic disease, increases all manner of disease risk, excessive weight, and of course, it elevates insulin. So here's the slide that kind of where the rubber meets the road on this yin-yang relationship between two hormones. The yin-yang symbol, I think, is very appropriate here. The dark and the light, the good and the bad, the bright versus the dim, the fast versus the slow. So ghrelin is the eat now signal. And leptin on the right is the I'm full now. The name for that is satiety or food satisfaction. So ghrelin on the left is highest before meals. It will increase your food intake and fat storage. And the story of chronic stress and hacked eating is by no means complete only with ghrelin, but chronic stress does boost the ghrelin hormone. And so we eat more with chronic stress. But ghrelin is unrelated to food craving and addiction, according to the research that I have dug around in. And then on the right, we see this long-term energy balancing hormone that is the counterweight to the short-term ghrelin. A body who has more fat on it will have much higher levels of ghrelin in circulation. It acts on the hypothalamus. The leptin hormone is, I'm speaking of leptin here on the right, critical for our energy balance and is a factor in food craving. A person with a healthy weight, their brain is probably responding normally to the leptin hormone. So this in quotations is the term blindness, and that comes from Susan Pierce Thompson, who is one of the teachers in my coaching program in plant-based health and wellness coaching. Susan Pierce Thompson is the principal of bright line eating. And if a person has a severe problem with weight management, they've tried and tried, an organization and the service like Bright Line Eating, brightlineeating.com, is probably advisable. But we call it leptin resistance. The research also calls it leptin insensitivity. Blindness is really a good idea and a good way to think of this because there's a ton of it in the body. There's a lot of it in a person who has excessive weight on their body, but the brain can't see it. And inflammation is involved in this. And you can see the statistics that we're talking about. The type 2 diabetes is a combination of both diabetic, which is around 29%, and then pre-diabetic includes those who don't know, who've never checked. And autoimmune disorders are involved here. Kidney disease, remarkably, 38% of adults 65 and up have something going on that is not healthy and are leaning towards a kidney problem. And for those in the vascular disease range, we're talking about heart disease, we're talking about vascular diseases of the brain. We're also talking about peripheral vascular disease, which could lead to an amputation or an aneurysm, those kinds of things. So let's look at some of the signs and the symptoms. Firstly, insulin resistance. Whenever there is blindness to leptin, or what we call insulin resistance, whenever there is blindness to leptin, that is leptin resistance, insulin resistance is there. Does insulin resistance cause leptin resistance? They don't know whether it does or not, but it's always present. Chronic stress is frequently involved, which means the elevation of the cortisol stress hormone, the fight-flight hormone, the elevation of adrenaline, also involved in fight-flight. But when adrenaline never comes down, there's a serious problem. And basically, chronic stress hacks fat saving. So a person who is under chronic stress won't be losing weight, even though they may want to. There's emotional hunger, not physical hunger. There is frequently inflammatory markers that we can measure, and a blood sugar, hemoglobin A1C, elevated triglycerides. And so if this sounds like the problem of health in America, you might be onto something, because I think generally this idea of hacked eating behavior is sort of at the root of what we're seeing, and that includes elevated risk of depression. Um, and then the outward sign, you wouldn't see necessarily the elevated depression, but we do see the outward signs of belly fat and liver fat. And whenever we're in that choice point where it's an evening, it's a late night, and you're gonna sit down to a bowl of ice cream, whoa, that's a sign right there. There might be something wrong. Or when you're sitting down to that great big meal at the restaurant and you look around and everybody's plate around the table is white or beige, and you go, that might be a sign as well. We want colorful meals going in our mouth. So the dopamine is our food or sex or codependency or heroin addictive molecule. And it signals, I deserve this. And that's enough said. Serotonin is marvelous and complex in its relationship to health and well-being. And it just so happens in looking at the research on the craving neurotransmitters, it just so happens low serotonin is associated with overeating. Yet, for sure, craving and addiction are triggered, are linked to dopamine. In Haines, Alaska, we think of food conditioning as referencing bears, wildlife that are in your garbage or tearing into an uninhabited cabin or finding a picnic basket and destroying it. Well, this ultra palatable salmon in bears is, I have come to realize that addiction is standing in front of a deli case. So what I advise people is that when you enter the grocery store or the cafe or the deli, go straight to the produce section. Walk straight to the produce section. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Pick up something good in the produce department. And then you're halfway there. And maybe that'll be the only thing you buy except for the cup of coffee, hopefully not the muffin. But the high dopamine surge is seeking high calories, plenty sweet, savory, salty, feeling reward, comfort, low, no fiber. The dopamine doesn't care about the fiber. But with that is a higher disease risk. And then there's the apple, the banana, the carrots, or whatever you happen to get out of the produce department, or that fantastic stir fry, which will be low dopamine, low calorie, lacking in sweet, lacking in savory. Hey, you know what? The cells in your mouth replace themselves quite frequently. The cells in your lower intestine, they last about a week and you swap them out. So the fact that you don't happen to like vegetables too much, or they're not sweet enough or not fatty enough, that will change quickly. And we can turn over, literally, we're turning over those taste receptor cells and making anew. And so we can retrain our taste receptors, our seeking of highly caloric food combinations when we lower the insulin resistance, when we get a handle on that. There's no question that's involved. Okay, as we're coming to the end, if somebody's involved with what they consider to be food addiction, by no means is all craving of food or all seeking of ultra palatable food combinations addiction. There's clearly people who have an addictive relationship, and they might, as Susan Pierce Thompson points out, they might be just addictive, addicted to other things as well as food. But there are two different Yale food addiction scales. One is new, one is old. 2016 was sort of the 2.0 version, 35 questions, and gives you a really good assessment. It's not hard at all. There's even calculators online where you can enter the data, answer the questions, and then you'll get your answer, your response right there. And here's some good resources for folks. Among the people who have been my teachers are Brenda Davis, on this screen Joel Furman and Howard Jacobson, who is a sort of an Uber coach, but Dr. Michael Clapper, all those people are available on YouTube in podcast form. Brenda Davis's YouTube channel is unbelievable, just fantastic. She's a marvelous teacher and presenter. Then, if you have questions about what I said about animal protein, I hope you will take a look at Garth Davis's book, Proteinaholic. There's somebody in the Haines community here in Haines, Alaska, who reversed their heart disease with the personal contact and guidance and encouragement by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, who wrote Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. And if you are suffering from cardiovascular disease or any sort of vascular problem, I strongly recommend that. And then The End of Diabetes, somebody who's toying with pre-diabetic conditions should check that one out. Here's 4 different websites that are all excellent. And I thank you. My name is Burl Sheldon, and I am a plant-based health and wellness coach. And I hope you'll consider reaching out to me if you have questions. And if you have any need for some of the research that I might have mentioned, I can perhaps provide that to you as well. Bye-bye.